Chapter 10, March 1981. So right there I'm going to stop because the last chapter we had when Hassan was run off, Amir was 13 years old and it was 1976. So now 5 more years have gone by. He's now 17 years old. And so we've got a 5-year gap in the story. So I just want to make sure that you guys are paying attention to the timeline so that you're able to, in your heads, picture Amir now 5 years older, 17 years old, so that we know there's been a big gap. Here we go. A young woman sat across from us. She was dressed in an olive green dress with a black shawl wrapped tightly around her face against the night chill. She burst into prayer every time the truck jerked or stumbled into a pothole, her Bismillah speaking with each of the truck's shudders and jolts. Her husband, a burly man in baggy pants and sky-blue turban, cradled an infant in one arm and thumbed prayer beads with his free hand. His lips moved in silent prayer. There were others, in all about a dozen, including Baba and me, sitting with our suitcases between our legs, cramped with these strangers in the tarpaulin-covered cab of an old Russian truck. Okay, so something's going on. There's a dozen people. They all have their bags cramped together, and Amir does not know them. My innards had been roiling since we'd left Kabul just after 2 in the morning. Baba never said so, but I knew he saw my car sickness as yet another of my array of weaknesses. I saw it on his embarrassed face the couple of times my stomach had clenched so badly I had moaned. When the burly guy with the beads, the praying woman's husband, asked if I was going to get sick, I said I might. Baba looked away. The man lifted his corner of the tarpaulin cover and rapped on the driver's window, asked him to stop. But the driver, Karim, a scrawny, dark-skinned man with hawk-boned features and a pencil-thin mustache, shook his head. "We are too close to Kabul," he shot back. "Tell him to have a strong stomach." Baba grumbled something under his breath. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, but suddenly I was salivating, the back of my throat tasting bile. I turned around, lifted the tarpaulin, and threw up over the side of the moving truck. Behind me, Baba was apologizing to the other passengers, as if car sickness was a crime, as if you weren't supposed to get sick when you were 18. I threw up 2 more times before Karim agreed to stop, mostly so I wouldn't stink up his vehicle, the instrument of his livelihood. Karim was a people smuggler. It was a pretty lucrative business then, driving people out of the Shirawi-occupied Kabul to the relative safety of Pakistan. So you guys remember at the very beginning when I showed you that PowerPoint and showed you where Pakistan is in relationship to Afghanistan. So they're now moving east into Pakistan. He was taking us to Jalalabad, about 170 kilometers southeast of Kabul, where his brother, Tur, who had a bigger truck with a second convoy of refugees, was waiting to drive us across the Khyber Pass into Peshawar. We were a few kilometers west of Mahapar Falls when Karim pulled to the side of the road. Mahapar, which means flying fish, was a high summit with a precipitous drop overlooking the hydro plant the Germans had built for Afghanistan back in 1967. Baba and I had driven over the summit countless times on our way to Jalalabad, the city of cypress trees and sugarcane fields where Afghans vacationed in the winter. I hopped down the back of the truck and lurched to the dusty embankment on the side of the road. My mouth filled with saliva, a sign of the retching that was yet to come. I stumbled to the edge of the cliff, overlooking the deep valley that was shrouded in darkness. I stooped, hands on my kneecaps, and waited for the bile. Somewhere, a branch snapped, an owl hooted. The wind, soft and cold, clicked through tree branches and stirred the bushes that sprinkled the slope. and from below the faint sound of water tumbling through the valley. Standing on the shoulder of the road, I thought of the way we'd left the house where I had lived my entire life, as if we were going out for a bite. Dishes smeared with kofta piled in the kitchen sink, laundry in the wicker basket in the foyer, beds unmade, Baba's business suits hanging in the closet. Tapestries still hung on the walls of the living room, and my mother's books still crowded the shelves in Baba's study. The signs of our elopement were subtle. My parents' wedding picture was gone, as was the grainy photograph of my grandfather and King Nader Shah standing over the dead deer. A few items of clothing were missing from the closets. The leather-bound notebook Rahim Khan had given me 5 years earlier was gone. In the morning, Jalaluddin, our 7th servant in 5 years, would probably think we'd gone out for a stroll or a drive. We hadn't told him. You couldn't trust anyone in Kabul anymore. For a fee or under threat, people told on each other. Neighbor on neighbor, child on parent, brother on brother, servant on master, friend on friend. In other words, nobody's safe, everyone's telling on everyone. I thought of the singer Ahmad Zaire, who had played the accordion at my 13th birthday. He had gone for a drive with some friends, and someone had later found his body on the side of the road, a bullet in the back of his head. The Rafiqs, the comrades, were everywhere, and they'd split Kabul into 2 groups, those who eavesdropped and those who didn't. The comrades means the Russians. The tricky part was that no one knew who belonged to which. A casual remark to the tailor while getting fitted for a suit might land you in the dungeons of Policharki. Complain about the curfew to the butcher, and next thing you know, you are behind bars, staring at the muzzle end of a Kalashnikov. Even at the dinner table, in the privacy of their home, people had to speak in a calculated manner. The Rafiqs were in the classrooms, too. They'd taught children to spy on their parents, what to listen for, whom to call. What was I doing on this road in the middle of the night? I should have been in bed, under my blanket, a book with dog-eared pages at my side. This had to be a dream, had to be. Tomorrow morning I'd wake up, peek out the window. No grim-faced Russian soldiers patrolling the sidewalks. No tanks rolling up and down the streets of my city, their turrets swiveling like accusing fingers. No rubble, no curfews, no Russian army personnel, careers weaving through the bazaars. Then, behind me, I heard Baba and Karim discussing the arrangement of Jalalabad over a smoke. Okay, stop right there. And I just wanted to point out another literacy technique that you guys can use to make sure you're comprehending this material. When he says, "What was I doing on the road?" and "I should have been in bed under my blanket," this had to be a dream. He was talking then, when he says, "Tomorrow I'm going to wake up," he's talking about all the things that have changed in Kabul that make it unbearable. And as a reader, since he is on the road, you have to understand that those details that he has just given, he's giving those to help you understand why he is on the road. So just bear in mind that that's kind of the methodology of this author, is to show you things by weaving them into the story. All right. Karim was reassuring Baba that his brother had a big truck of, quote, excellent and first-class quality, and that the trek to Peshawar would be very routine. He could take you there with his eyes closed, Karim said. I overheard him telling Baba how he and his brother knew the Russian and Afghan soldiers who worked the checkpoints, how they had set up a mutually profitable arrangement. This was no dream. As if on cue, a MiG suddenly screamed past overhead. Karim tossed his cigarette and produced a handgun from his waist. So a MiG is a Russian airplane. Pointing it to the sky and making shooting gestures, he spat and cursed at the MiG. Also, you guys, if you're curious what's going on, Go back to that PowerPoint because it gives all the history. I wondered where Hassan was. Then the inevitable. I vomited on a tangle of weeds, my retching and groaning drowned in the deafening roar of the MiG. We pulled up to the checkpoint at Mahapar 20 minutes later. Our driver let the truck idle and hopped down to greet the approaching voices. Feet crushed gravel. Words were exchanged, brief and hushed. A flick of a lighter. Spasiba. Another flick of the lighter. Someone laughed, a shrill, cackling sound that made me jump. Baba's hand clamped down on my thigh. The laughing man broke into song, a slurring, off-key rendition of an old Afghan wedding song, delivered with a thick Russian accent. And what he sings means, "Go slowly, my lovely moon, go slowly." When he says, "Go slowly, my lovely moon, go slowly," it sounds like that wedding song means they want the night to last forever. Interesting, given that Amir is having like the worst night of his life ever. Boot heels clicked on asphalt. Someone flung open the tarpaulin hanging over the back of the truck, and 3 faces peered in. One was Kareem. The other 2 were soldiers, one Afghan, the other a grinning Russian, face like a bulldog's, cigarette dangling from the side of his mouth. Behind them, a bone-colored moon hung in the sky. Kareem and the Afghan soldier had a brief exchange in Pashto. I caught a little of it, something about Tor and his bad luck. The Russian soldier thrust his face into the rear of the truck. He was humming the wedding song and drumming his fingers on the edge of the tailgate. Even in the dim light of the moon, I saw the glazed look in his eyes as they skipped from passenger to passenger. There's eyes again, that motif we've been looking at. Despite the cold, sweat streamed from his brow. His eyes settled on the young woman wearing the black shawl. He spoke in Russian to Kareem without taking his eyes off her. Kareem gave a curt reply in Russian, which the soldier returned with an even curter retort. The Afghan soldier said something too, in a low, reasoning voice. But the Russian soldier shouted something that made the other 2 flinch. I could feel Baba tightening up next to me. Kareem cleared his throat, dropped his head, said the soldier wanted a half hour with the lady in the back of the truck. The young woman pulled the shawl down over her face, burst into tears. The toddler sitting in her husband's lap started crying too. The husband's face had become as pale as the moon hovering above. He told Kareem to ask Mr. Soldier Sahib to show a little mercy. Maybe he had a sister or a mother. Maybe he had a wife too. The Russian listened to Kareem and barked a series of words. "It's his price for letting us pass," Kareem said. He couldn't bring himself to look the husband in the eye. "But we've paid a fair price already. He's getting paid good money," the husband said. And just in case you guys don't understand, the Russian is basically saying he wants to rape this man's wife before he'll let anybody pass. Kareem and the Russian soldier spoke. He says every price has a tax. That was when Baba stood up. It was my turn to clamp a hand on his thigh, but Baba pried it loose, snatched his leg away. When he stood, he eclipsed the moonlight. "I want you to ask this man something," Baba said. He said it to Kareem, but looked directly at the Russian officer. "Ask him where his shame is." They spoke. "He says this is war. There is no shame in war." "Tell him he's wrong. War doesn't negate decency. It demands it, even more than in times of peace." Do you always have to be the hero? I thought, my heart fluttering. Can't you just let it go for once? But I knew he couldn't. It wasn't in his nature. The problem was his nature was going to get us all killed. The Russian soldier said something to Kareem, a smile creasing his lips. "Aga Saim," Kareem says, "these Rusi are not like us. They understand nothing about respect, honor." "What did he say?" "He says he'll enjoy putting a bullet in you almost as much as Karim trailed off, but nodded his head toward the young woman who had caught the guard's eye. The soldier flicked his unfinished cigarette and unholstered his handgun. So this is where Baba dies, I thought. This is how it's going to happen. In my head, I said a prayer I had learned in school. Tell him I'll take 1,000 of his bullets before I let this indecency take place, Baba said. My mind flashed to that winter day 6 years ago, me peering around the corner in the alley, Kamal and Wally holding Hassan down, Asif's buttock muscles clenching and unclenching, his hips thrusting back and forth. Some hero I had been, fretting about the kite. Sometimes I too wondered if I was really Baba's son. The bulldog-faced Russian raised his gun. Baba, sit down, please, I said, tugging at his sleeve. I think he really means to shoot you. Baba slapped my hand away. Haven't I taught you anything? He snapped. He turned to the grinning soldier. Tell him he'd better kill me good with that first shot, because if I don't go down, I'm tearing him to pieces, God damn his father. The Russian soldier's grin never faltered when he heard the translation. He clicked the safety on the gun, pointed the barrel at Baba's chest. Heart pounding in my throat, I buried my face in my hands. The gun roared. It's done then. I'm 18 and alone. I have no one left in the world. Baba's dead, and now I have to bury him. Where do I bury him? Where do I go after that? But the whirlwind of half-thoughts spinning in my head came to a halt when I cracked my eyelids, found Baba still standing. I saw a second Russian officer with the others. It was from the muzzle of his upturned gun that smoke swirled. The soldier who had meant to shoot Baba had already holstered his weapon. He was shuffling his feet. I had never felt more like crying and laughing at the same time. The second Russian officer, gray-haired and heavy-set, spoke to us in broken Farsi. He apologized for his comrades' behavior. Russia sends them here to fight, he said, but they are just boys, and when they come here, they find the pleasure of drug. He gave the younger officer the rueful look of a father exasperated with his misbehaving son. This one is attached to drug now. I try to stop him. He waves us off. Moments later, we were pulling away. I heard a laugh, and then the first soldier's voice, slurry and off-key, singing the old wedding song. I think that's a critically important scene that just happened, that just took place, where Baba stands up in the face of death to do what's right and noble. And Amir, watching, only wants his dad to sit back down. And I just would ask that you guys think in your own heads. It's obvious who we'd rather be. I think we'd all rather be Baba. But really try and come to terms with who you would be. Would you have been Baba in that situation, or would you have been Amir? And I just want to point out, most of the people in the truck were Amir. No one was going to stop that man from raping the woman, except for Baba. And it's such a show of character, and an interesting show of character, because don't we kind of hate Baba because of how he treats Amir, and at the same time he'll stand up for this woman who he doesn't even know. It's fascinating. So make a note of that situation and what just went down in the truck. We rode in silence for about 15 minutes before the young woman's husband suddenly stood and did something I'd seen many others do before him. He kissed Baba's hand. Tour's bad luck. Hadn't I overheard that in a snippet of conversation back at Mahabar? We rolled into Jalalabad about an hour before sunrise. Karim ushered us quickly from the truck into a one-story house at the intersection of two dirt roads lined with flat one-story homes, acacia trees, and closed shops. I pulled the collar of my coat against the chill as we hurried into the house, dragging our belongings. For some reason, I remember smelling radishes. Notice there was a tree there. Again, I'm not sure whether it's going to matter, but if we're marking motifs, and the motifs I've chosen are trees and eyes, then you just want to make a note every time you see them, and then you can determine later whether they're important. Once he had us inside the dimly lit, bare living room, Karim locked the front door, pulled the tattered sheets that passed for curtains. Then he took a deep breath and gave us the bad news. His brother Tor couldn't take us to Peshawar. It seemed his truck's engine had blown the week before, and Tor was still waiting for parts. "Last week?" someone exclaimed. "If you knew this, why did you bring us here?" I caught a flurry of movement out of the corner of my eye, then a blur of something zipping across the room, and the next thing I saw was Kareem slammed against the wall, his sandaled feet dangling 2 feet above the floor. Wrapped around his neck were Baba's hands. "I'll tell you why," Baba snapped. "Because he got paid for his leg of the trip. That's all he cared about." Kareem was making guttural choking sounds. Spittle dripped from the corner of his mouth. "Put him down, Naga. You're killing him," one of the passengers said. "That's what I intend to do," Baba said. What none of the others in the room knew was that Baba wasn't joking. Kareem was turning red and kicking his legs. Baba kept choking him until the young mother, the one the Russian officer had fancied, begged him to stop. Kareem collapsed on the floor and rolled around fighting for air when Baba finally let go. The room fell silent. Less than 2 hours ago, Baba had volunteered to take a bullet for the honor of a woman he didn't even know. Now he'd almost choked a man to death, would have done it cheerfully, if not for the pleas of that same woman. Something thumped next door. No, not next door, below. "What's that?" someone asked. "The others," Kareem panted between labored breaths. "In the basement." "How long have they been waiting?" Baba said, standing over Kareem. 2 weeks. "I thought you said the truck broke down last week." Kareem rubbed his throat. "It might have been the week before," he croaked. "How long?" "What?" "How long for the parts?" Baba roared. Kareem flinched but said nothing. I was glad for the darkness. I didn't want to see the murderous look on Baba's face. So again, I just want to point out this juxtaposition of Baba. Or maybe it's a similarity, that in this situation, Baba was noble and then he wants to fight and kill somebody, but you could argue that that too is for nobility. Like, it's not noble what this guy did to take their money and bring them only halfway when he knew they weren't going to get the whole way. So it forces you to kind of consider Baba. Is he a true Afghani who considers custom so important and honor and integrity so important that it's worth killing another human being? Just something to think about. The stench of something dank, like mildew, bludgeoned my nostrils the moment Kareem opened the door that led down the creaky steps to the basement. We descended in single file. The steps groaned under Baba's weight. Standing in the cold basement, I felt watched by eyes blinking in the dark. I saw shapes huddled around the room, their silhouettes thrown on the wall by the dim light of a pair of kerosene lamps. A low murmur buzzed through the basement. Beneath it, the sound of water drops trickling somewhere, and something else, a scratching sound. Baba sighed behind me and dropped his bags. Kareem told us it should be a matter of a couple of short days before the truck was fixed. Then we'd be on our way to Peshawar, on to freedom, on to safety. The basement was our home for the next week, and by the third night, I discovered the source of the scratching sounds. Rats. Once my eyes adjusted to the dark, I counted about 30 refugees in that basement. We sat shoulder to shoulder along the walls, ate crackers, bread with dates, apples. That first night, all the men prayed together. One of the refugees asked Baba why he wasn't joining them. "God is going to save us all. Why don't you pray to him?" Baba snorted a pinch of his snuff, stretched his legs. "What'll save us is 8 cylinders and a good carburetor." That silenced the rest of them for good about the matter of God. It was later that first night when I discovered that 2 of the people hiding with us were Kamal and his father. That was shocking enough, seeing Kamal sitting in the basement just a few feet away from me. Remember, Kamal was one of the boys that held down Hassan. But when he and his father came over to our side of the room and I saw Kamal's face, really saw it, he had withered. There was simply no other word for it. His eyes, there are eyes again, gave me a hollow look, and no recognition at all registered in them. His shoulders hunched and his cheeks sagged like they were too tired to cling to the bone beneath. His father, who'd owned a movie theater in Kabul, was telling Baba how, 3 months before, a stray bullet had struck his wife in the temple and killed her. Then he told Baba about Kamal. I caught only snippets of it. Should have never let him go alone. Always so handsome, you know. 4 of them tried to fight. God took him, bleeding down there. His pants. Doesn't talk anymore. Just stares. And there is a bitter, bitter, bitter irony if you can understand the inference. So you have to draw from your knowledge of both the Inference podcast and the Irony podcast in order to talk about what just happened. There would be no truck, Kareem told us after we'd spent a week in the rat-infested basement. The truck was beyond repair. There is another option, Kareem said, his voice rising amid the groans. His cousin owned a fuel truck and had smuggled people with it a couple of times. He was here in Jalalabad and could probably fit us all. Everyone except an elderly couple decided to go. We left that night, Baba and I, Kamal and his father, the others. Kareem and his cousin, a square-faced, balding man named Aziz, helped us get into the fuel tank. One by one, we mounted the idling truck's rear deck, climbed the rear access ladder, and slid down into the tank. I remember Baba climbed halfway up the ladder, hopped back down, and fished the snuff box from his pocket. He emptied the box and picked up a handful of dirt from the middle of the unpaved road. He kissed the dirt, poured it into the box, stowed the box in his breast pocket, next to his heart. So again, in that moment, we see yet another side to Baba, that he is so desperate for his country and knows that he's going to leave it, that he lets go of his snuff, that we've seen him with all book, and instead replaces it with dirt from his homeland. And I just feel, I can't help but feel a sense of honor, that he's honoring his country in that move. Panic. You open your mouth, open it so wide your jaws creak. You order your lungs to draw air now. You need air, need it now. But your airways ignore you. They collapse, tighten, squeeze, and suddenly you're breathing through a drinking straw. Your mouth closes and your lips purse, and all you can manage is a strangled croak. Your hands wriggle and shake. Somewhere a dam has cracked open and a flood of cold sweat spills, drenches your body. You want to scream. You would if you could, but you have to breathe to scream. Panic. Now again, I want to point out this is what the author is doing. He's weaving in bits and pieces to help you understand the whole. So remember, they've just gone into a tank. So picture those round tanks on the back of trucks. That's where the people all are, and they're all closed up because they're being smuggled. And so there's no extra air, there's no windows, it's pitch black. And so what he's describing here is this panic that sets in because you can't breathe well enough. The basement had been dark. The fuel tank was pitch black. I looked right, left, up, down, waved my hands before my eyes, didn't see so much as a hint of movement. I blinked, blinked again. Nothing at all. The air wasn't right. It was too thick, almost solid. Air wasn't supposed to be solid. I wanted to reach out with my hands, crush the air into little pieces, stuff them down my windpipe. And the stench of gasoline. My eyes stung from the fumes, like someone had peeled my lids back and rubbed a lemon on them. My nose caught fire with each breath. You could die in a place like this, I thought. A scream was coming, coming. And then a small miracle. Baba tugged at my sleeve and something glowed green in the dark. Light. Baba's wristwatch. I kept my eyes glued to those fluorescent green hands. I was so afraid I'd lose them, I didn't dare blink. Slowly, I became aware of my surroundings. I heard groans and muttered prayers. I heard a baby cry, its mother's muted soothing. Someone retched. Someone else cursed the Sharawi. The truck bounced side to side, up and down. Heads banged against metal. Think of something good, Baba said in my ear. Something happy. Something good. Something happy. I let my mind wander. I let it come. Friday afternoon in Pagman, an open field of grass speckled with mulberry trees in blossom. Hassan and I stand ankle deep in untamed grass. I am tugging on the line, the spool spinning in Hassan's calloused hands, our eyes turned up to the kite in the sky. Not a word passes between us, not because we have nothing to say, but because we don't have to say anything. That's how it is between people who are each other's first memories, people who have fed from the same breast. A breeze stirs the grass, and Hassan lets the spool roll. The kite spins, dips, steadies. Our twin shadows dance on the rippling grass. From somewhere over the low brick wall at the other end of the field, we hear chatter and laughter and the chirping of a water fountain. And music, something old and familiar. I think it's Ya Mola on rhubarb strings. Someone calls our names over the wall, says it's time for tea and cake. I didn't remember what month that was, or what year even. I only knew the memory lived in me, a perfectly encapsulated morsel of a good past, a brush stroke of color on the gray, barren canvas that our lives had become. And there's color again, and color is an archetype, which is a universal symbol. We'll talk more about those later. The rest of that ride is scattered bits and pieces of memory that come and go, most of it sounds and smells. MiGs roaring past overhead, staccatos of gunfire, a donkey braying nearby, the jingle of bells and mewling of sheep, gravel crushed under the truck's tires, a baby wailing in the dark, the stench of gasoline, vomit, and shit. What I remember next is the blinding light of early morning as I climbed out of the fuel tank. I remember turning my face up to the sky, squinting, breathing like the world was running out of air. I lay on the side of the dirt road next to a rocky trench, looked up to the gray morning sky, thankful for air, thankful for light, thankful to be alive. "We're in Pakistan, Amir," Baba said. He was standing over me. "Karim says he will call for a bus to take us to Peshawar." I rolled onto my chest, still lying on the cool dirt, and saw our suitcases on either side of Baba's feet. Through the upside-down V between his legs, I saw the truck idling on the other side of the road, the other refugees climbing down the rear ladder. Beyond that, the dirt road unrolled through fields that were like leaden sheets under the gray sky that disappeared behind a line of bowl-shaped hills. Along that way, it passed a small village strung out atop a sun-baked slope. My eyes returned to our suitcases. They made me sad for Baba. For after everything he'd built, planned, fought for, fretted over, dreamed of, this was the summation of his life. One disappointing son and 2 suitcases. Someone was screaming. No, not screaming, wailing. I saw the passengers huddled in a circle, heard their urgent voices. Someone said the word fumes. Someone else said it too. The wail turned into a throat-ripping screech. Baba and I hurried to the pack of onlookers and pushed our way through them. Kamal's father was sitting cross-legged in the center of the circle, rocking back and forth, kissing his son's ashen face. "He won't breathe. My boy won't breathe," he was crying. Kamal's lifeless body lay on his father's lap. His right hand, uncurled and limp, bounced to the rhythm of his father's sobs. "My boy, he won't breathe. Allah, help him breathe." Baba knelt beside him and curled an arm around his shoulder. But Kamal's father shoved him away and lunged for Karim, who was standing nearby with his cousin. What happened next was too fast and too short to be called a scuffle. Karim uttered a surprised cry and backpedaled. I saw an arm swing, a leg kick. A moment later, Kamal's father was standing with Kareem's gun in his hand. "Don't shoot me!" Kareem cried. But before any of us could say or do a thing, Kamal's father shoved the barrel in his own mouth. I'll never forget the echo of that blast, or the flash of light and the spray of red. I doubled over again and dry heaved on the side of the road.